Welcome to the open air.
Hi.
So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about driving versus flying.
It's a big difference.
It's hard to fly a minivan very far. Like
Yeah, you could go for about 50 feet.
Yeah, maybe. And how do you know this?
It's a guesstimate.
The trajectory, right? So you've mathed that out.
You know what? I have been doing math that would allow me to figure that out if you really wanted to know.
You have been taking Algebra 2, right, lately?
Algebra 2.
Algebra 2.
Yes.
Studying algebra, right? So how does that compare to pilot math?
Algebra math to pilot math. I could see how they're interrelated. Algebra 2 has more theoretical things that I haven't really seen their practical application, but I could see how they could be used. Now doing the graphs, the parabolas, I could see being very aviation geared.
A lot of the charts in a lot of aircraft manuals have already done the math for you, and they already have those graphs.
Right.
So you're just learning to read the graphs.
Right.
But the information has already been sort of calculated and provided
you
for the most part. But if you didn't have that, you could math it out and figure that out based on
Yes, you could.
the factors that you have.
You could.
So, I said that word, and I'm trying not to say it.
I started you off bad because I said it too.
Yep.
That was my fault. I set the tone. I'm
You did.
sorry.
Yeah, don't use that.
Sorry.
So, flying is a great way to get to your destination, but there are some considerations, right? So, time is probably the biggest thing that people think of in the time the time savings that they would have to fly versus driving.
Right.
But do you really save a lot of time? Do you think?
Depends. Are we talking about commercial flying or flying your own personal aircraft?
Well, I think that's a great point. So if you're flying a personal aircraft versus a dang it, I said it again. If you're flying a personal aircraft versus commercial aircraft, then you're going to save more time flying commercially.
Yes. And a lot of that is because the prep work for the aircraft is not being done by you. Even though you have to show up early to go through TSA and all those things, their aircraft also go 300 miles an hour.
Right. They have multi-million-dollar jet engines that propel them through the sky, and they can go much higher, so there's less air resistance. So they can go much faster.
Much, much faster. Now, for a personal aircraft, there's a lot of pre-flight prep.
There's pre-flight and loading the airplane, but then there's fueling the airplane and...
doing your walk around.
Right.
Checking it all out.
But then there's all of the setting up the instruments, setting up the radios, planning out your flight.
Right. And that's done before you even get out to the airport.
Presumably. And so there's a mnemonic that a lot of private pilot CFIs or students use called PACE.
Yes.
And I don't teach that, so you probably don't know that. We talked about it a little bit earlier, and you didn't really know the PACE acronym.
Right. I had not heard that one.
But that's basically pilot, aircraft, environment, and I don't remember the E.
Environment would be E. Pilot, aircraft.
Environment is the V, right?
External?
It's PAVE. Yeah, so it's pilot, aircraft, environment, and external considerations, right? So I don't really use that, but that's a common mnemonic that's used in private pilot training.
Yeah.
And it gets the point across. What I teach are the 4 considerations to make a go, no-go decision, right? And
Right.
we talk about these. So first of all, you have to understand the most aircraft accidents are not because a pilot made a bad decision or one bad thing happened. It's a
Right.
series of events,
It is.
right? And I call it the chain of deadly events, right? So it wasn't one or two things, but it's a series of things. So
Yeah.
like,
And we've talked about kind of the 3 strikes.
right. I like that general concept of like 3 strikes and you're out. If you show up at the airport and your aircraft doesn't have enough fuel, so you got to fuel it in, but maybe the fuel pumps are out of service, or
Yeah,
you don't
they're
have,
acting up.
you don't
or-
really have the time, and so you're like, okay, I'll make a fuel stop later, but I don't really have the time now, and so then, but you feel rushed, or maybe you do fuel the airplane, but you feel rushed, and so you forgot your flight bag.
Yep.
So you get in, you get it all fueled up, and you get in, and you get ready to go, and you take off, and now your flight bag is still back in your car, so you don't have your iPad, you don't have all the other things,
Right.
and
But you're like, oh, I'm just going to,
I'm
An
only
hour
going.
away.
I'm only flying for an hour, so I know my way there. I'll get there, but then you also, because you were rushed, you didn't check the weather, and so now there's some weather moving in, and all these considerations, right? All
Right.
these little things that happened, or under normal circumstances, could be fine. Or if you know about them ahead of time, you can make your decision. Oh, if I delay my flight for 15 minutes, it'll be better. Or maybe I better get going now.
right.
To avoid that, front that's sort of going to be moving through whatever area,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'll be fine.
Yes. And to make it a little bit more relatable to maybe people who do not fly, this does happen with driving a car too. If you wake up in the morning and you're rushed and your head's just not in the game, sometimes you'll go through a stop sign. Sometimes you won't see that car, turning in front of you, and you have to slam on your brakes. So it's not that this is something that's specific to flying an airplane specifically.
And it's not really the scope of this podcast to cover all the things that could possibly go wrong. It could be something as simple as you forgot the aircraft keys at home, and so you had to turn around and go home. It's a
Right.
15-minute drive back home.
Right.
Grab the keys and get back out there. Now you've got a half-hour delay to all the things. So the weather you checked, and your flight plan,
Right.
all the things that you had going on are now delayed a half hour, and that weather or whatever the other considerations are now become more of a factor. And so there's that
Right.
chain of events where you got to keeping that in mind, then I teach the 4 elements of a go, no-go decision are, well, the first 3 you can do when you're in bed.
Right.
And so the first one is, are you safe? As the pilot, right? Are you
Right.
safe? And so there's an acronym that the FAA uses.
Yep.
Do you remember that?
I'm safe,
The I'm safe
which makes sense.
checklist.
Right.
And do you remember what that mnemonic is?
Let's see. Illness, medication, stress. I know E's in environment. Oh, alcohol. And
No drinking within 50 feet of the airplane. No smoking 8 hours prior to flight. Or, no. I kid. I joke.
Yes. Alcohol.
Yep.
Ooh,
Fatigue.
fatigue, feeling tired.
Yep.
And then E is environment or
Right. So, and that's in the PAVE, right? Environment is in there
Yes.
as well. But that's in the FAR AIM, that is one of the things the FAA recommends that you use as a checklist, right? So to do a self-assessment to see if you are good to fly. If you have a sinus infection and you're feeling a lot of sinus pressure, flying an airplane is going to be brutally painful.
yes, and an unpressurized aircraft, it is not fun.
Right. And many of the medications you might take for that would
They're on the
bar you
blacklist.
from being able to fly anyway. So there's a list of medications on the FAA webpage that you should not take if you're going to fly.
I think Sudafed is one, and that's a go-to for sinus pressure.
Yep, that's what I had in mind when I was saying that, for sure. So you're safe. Let's just say everything's good. You've gone through
Yep.
your I'm safe checklist and you're good to go. What is the next thing then you need to consider?
Is your aircraft good to go?
Nope, that's last.
That's
actually.
last.
Yeah, and the reason is you have to be at the airport to decide whether your aircraft is good, right?
Yes.
You need to be there. So we're still in bed. We haven't got out of bed yet. We're doing our self-assessment.
Oh, okay.
Okay, we've done I'm safe. We're still in bed. All right, I'm good. But now what's the weather doing? Because
Okay.
if there's a blizzard of the century coming through or a major storm front moving through the
Right.
airport right now or moving through your destination at this point,
Right. Or
Then
there
you're
are wildfires blowing smoke through.
whatever yeah, absolutely. There's a volcano, right? So that hasn't happened since the 80s, Mount St. Helen,
Right.
but
Always a possibility.
always a possibility, right? So the weather is a consideration. There's all kinds of sources to go check your weather and a lot of learning about weather that
Yes.
happens in your private pilot training. So I don't think we need to really go into a lot of in depth into that. But it's certainly the next thing to check, right? So you're good. Now let's just say the weather's good.
Yep.
But now what do you need to check?
Is the airport you're going to good?
Is the airport good? Well, yeah, first of all, is the airport you're taking off from good and your destination good? So there's one thing, especially during political season when there's candidates out flying around, there's TFRs all the time. If the airport's closed,
And what does TFR stand for those of our watchers and listeners who do not know?
totally freaking no.
No.
Temporary flight restriction, right? So it is
I think
as a result of 9/11, it's something that came about where the FAA can determine that there is a restriction of flights that go into an airport based on or another area. Doesn't even have to be an airport. It usually is.
I think they do that on the stadiums.
Stadiums, if there's more than so many people in the stadium.
Yeah.
And I don't have that information in front of me, but it's in the FAR aim. Presidential TFRs, or if there's a president or a high-level politician, doesn't necessarily have to be a president, landing or taking off from that airport, then there will be
Right,
a
right.
flight restriction. Other high-level figures and ambassadors, and there's other, maybe military, other considerations for that as well. So, but the idea is you're checking the airports to make sure they're good, right? They're not closed. Maybe the runway's under construction.
Right.
Des Moines, Iowa is one that's notorious for
Goodness,
one of
yes.
their runways being under construction. And so depending on what the winds are doing when you check the weather and what the runways are, maybe if you have to take off on a crosswind runway and there's a stiff wind, maybe you decide you don't want to fly that day.
Right. Maybe that's outside of
So you're still in bed, and now you've checked whether you're good and checked whether the weather is good. And now you've checked whether or not the airports are good, and you check all the notices to
Yeah.
airmen, that sort of thing. And then you can go to the airport. So now the first three things, they're all good. You go to the airport, and as you said earlier, then you would check the airplane. Is the airplane good? So you do your pre-flight, and you make sure it has fuel, and all the gauges are working, and all that sort of thing. Then you can take off and go. So we've already burned through a considerable amount of time doing those things.
Right.
Which would be probably your drive to a commercial airport if you're going to fly commercially.
Right.
Of course, if you're driving, you just walk out into the garage, and we have a heated garage, so make sure you wear a coat in the wintertime.
It's misleading.
Yeah, it's 72 degrees in the garage, so we walk out in our, a T-shirt, and you've got your tennis shoes on. You get in the
Yep.
van. It's like, oh, I'm going to run to the store, and you get in the van, and the van's been sitting in the garage,
van's
so it's
warm.
72 degrees. Then you get to the store.
Get to the store.
And you get out of the van, and you're like, holy mackerel, it's below zero outside. It's really cold.
And people are looking at you funny because they're like,
like, why
where's
did this
your coat?
Dummy walking around with a T-shirt and no coat on. And it's like, well, it was 72 degrees when I left my house. I'm like, where did you drive from?
My house.
The other side of town.
Right?
But so those are some considerations for flying private aircraft versus commercial aircraft, and also driving. So if you're
Yes.
driving, your vehicle's already there. You can load all your stuff the day before. You make sure you have gas the day before. All the same kind of things we do for driving. It's just more, we do it more frequently. Right?
Yes.
That's almost like a daily routine for most of us. So
Right,
almost
right.
second nature. We don't really think about it so much. But we want to make sure the tires are rotated and that it's been properly maintained and the oil's been changed, at the proper times, and the other service points,
Right.
benchmarks have been met. And then we can go. So driving, obviously you're going to average something like 50 miles an hour over the course of a trip. Versus flying, you're probably going to fly at least twice that.
Right.
About 100, 120 miles an hour is like a personal private aircraft.
Yeah. And then in that same vein, when you're driving, your route might look like this, depending on what the roads are.
There's some
And an
time
airplane.
savings going from A to B. Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point.
So it's not as cut and dry as it's going to be twice as fast because you're going twice as fast.
The route definitely matters.
The routes matter.
Driving route. If you're driving around a big Lake Michigan or something, right? You
Or through the mountains, and you've got to
right?
twist and turn and twist and turn and twist and turn.
Yep. No, those are good points. Also, though, some other points are the number of passengers.
Yes.
So our aircraft can only hold 4 people, and there's 5 of us in our family.
Yes.
So unless somebody wants to ride on the wing, which would be frowned upon unless you have a wing walking air show card that I do not have. And I don't think any of our kids would be amenable to that anyway.
There's one of them that might think they would be until they actually tried it, and then they would change their mind very quickly.
I agree with that. Yes.
They'd be like, "Oh, that sounds cool." Oh, never mind.
But also, depending on the weather, the equipment that the plane has matters, right? So if you're flying through
Yes.
weather and instrument conditions, and the plane doesn't have instrument equipment for instrument navigation equipment,
Well,
then,
and you have to be
you have to be
certified.
certified. But there's more than just being certified, right? So you also
Correct.
have to have what?
proficiency.
You're right. So there's one of the things that we talk about is currency versus proficiency. So I have to do an approach every 6 months to be current. But if I haven't done one in 5.5 months, I am probably not proficient.
Right.
So that would definitely be a consideration as well. Also, the cargo you're taking. If you're like our daughter,
Oh my.
I'm not going to name anybody by name, but I only have one daughter, so you can do the math on that.
Yep.
She moves in when we go on a trip.
Yeah, yeah. Our upcoming trip has got her a little bit frazzled because we're like, you only get a suitcase and a carry-on. That's it.
Right.
And she is struggling with that. She's like, but what
She
about
wants to
this?
take her
But what about
blankets and
this?
her
But what-
pillows and her sleeping bag,
all of her
and
stuffed animals.
accessory bag, and her stuffed animals, and her clothes bag, but then also her to-go bag with all of her books and
Yes.
technology and everything else, plus all of the other
Plus room to
girl
bring things
stuff
home.
and right.
It gets interesting.
So a lot of major considerations. So driving versus flying, often weight and balance is a consideration for our family.
Yes, and flying commercially, like we just said,
Same thing.
You get
a
a
carry-on
limited
bag
amount.
and a check-in bag, or you got to pay extra, or there's
Right.
a lot of other considerations for that too. So just stuff that we talk about in flight training and kind of making it relational to sort of driving. Also, reasons to like we're big in travel. We're kind of a travel family. We're both pilots, so I mean that
It makes
kind
sense.
of makes sense. But some reasons to travel. So we make a lot of our trips educational, right?
Yeah, we do make an effort to find things along the way to bring history to life for our kids.
Right.
Because There is so much history in our country that's just kind of overlooked.
And talking about it, so all of our kids are reading about history at various different levels in their classes, whether it's their 5th grade or their 9th or 10th grade classes.
Right.
They're reading about history, and it doesn't bring it to life. And then sometimes we'll find movies, like the other day, one of our children are studying World War II, so we watched the
Yes.
movie Midway with them,
Mm-hmm.
and that brought a lot of it to life for them.
Right. And we make a point when we watch those movies that we want our kids to ask questions about it because they're like, wait. What
And
about this? What about this?
accentuate
What about
why
this?
things were happening. So I had introduced our middle son who's doing the World War II. I'd introduced him to Jimmy Doolittle here a couple of weeks ago. And then we watched Midway, and Jimmy Doolittle and the Doolittle Raid are highlighted in the movie.
They are, yeah. And then
Almost as an aside, so they didn't really focus on that so much, but it was definitely a
Right.
significant
well,
portion
and
of the
then
movie.
our daughter
Yep.
is in human geography, and one of her questions was about the South China Sea. She's like, I have no idea where that is. I'm like, well, you could probably make a pretty educated guess about that because we just watched Midway, and the Doolittle Raiders bombed Japan and then flew across a body of water to China.
Yep.
And in the movie, it said what sea they were crossing.
Yep.
So she's like, I think I got it right.
Awesome. Which was neat because one of the destinations that we went to was also Little Rock, Arkansas,
Yes.
which we stopped and we talked about. It was one of the first desegregated schools in the country
Yes.
back in the day. And we stopped there and we talked a lot about that history, and that's not really the point of this podcast. But it was neat because we incorporated that into our trip, and then the week after we got back, our daughter had a test, and they talked about that.
They got into that part of history,
Yep.
and she was all excited. She telling her teacher, I went
She
there.
had
I've seen the
pictures
high
and she
school.
saw
I've
it,
seen
and-
the
yeah, it was really cool.
memorial.
So we try to. So education is one reason to travel, because being there and seeing historic places and experiencing historic places.
Right. And just learning about our country in general and seeing how vast it is and how diverse it is. We live here in the Midwest. We've got, the rolling hills. You go across Nebraska and it's flat. There's mountains, there's oceans, there's canyons and deserts.
Right. Yeah. The geography, topography, all of that matters, and experiencing it in person is far more valuable than reading about it in a book or watching pictures
it on
or
YouTube.
watching a video.
YouTube. Wow. YouTube.
Beep, bop, doop.
I'm like an Ewok.
Wow. Yep. So we try to make our vacations also educational. So we've got education, vacation, destination,
Yes.
relaxation, and alliteration.
You had to throw that one in because it rhymed.
I did.
It would have been better if they all started with the same letter. I'm not going to lie.
I tried.
Well, let's see.
Du-
Education.
Dave.
Edification? No.
Dave.
Dave.
Destination.
Dave.
Alliteration. Vacation. Education. Dave.
Daver.
Yep. Oh, relaxation. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've covered. So I had a flight student that got his private pilot's license with the intent that he's a pastor, and he had family down in Mississippi, and then he had family out on the East Coast, I think around Washington, D.C. area. And he works sort of 6 days a week, and sort of Monday, or maybe even Monday, Tuesday are his days off. So that's during the weekdays, so it's hard for him to see family.
Right.
But with 2 days off, if he drives out, he can have dinner with them and maybe stay the night, and then he's got to spend the rest of the next day driving back.
Right.
So he only gets to go out and see them for maybe a few hours.
Right.
So he got his pilot's license with the intent that he would be able to fly out and see family, and maybe even work in some longer destinations, like leave after church on Sunday, and then he would
Right.
have Sunday evening Monday and then Tuesday, and then he could return back on Wednesday,
Right.
and bought a bunch of extra time.
Right.
And so he got his pilot's license, and then he upgraded to a faster Mooney, a faster aircraft.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he does. And he's flown, I don't know, hundreds of hours in that Mooney now.
He has, and he raves about being able to go down and spend basically an entire extra day with his family.
Or, yeah, a day and a half even for what it would take to drive down there. And that extra time has been so valuable for him.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to see that that's working out as he intended.
Yeah.
It's been great. I've had other students, but not as that have kind of done that as well, but not as vivid or not as what's the word that I'm looking for?
Impactful.
Right.
Or...
It wasn't as big of a focus for them.
Yeah.
Like it was almost a side. But that
It's
was
like,
his
oh, yeah, that
entire
would be
intent
handy.
of getting his pilot's license, and that's what he's used it for, and he's very happy with it.
Yeah.
He does use it for travel for work sometimes. If he's going to go preach at another church or go to a convention, he may fly down there instead of fly back, which, again, he can either go and divert and go see family for a day on the way back, or he makes it back in more time so he can get more stuff done
Right.
at the
right.
church or at home when he gets back. So it has really
It's been
like
life-changing for him.
a time machine for him, where it has bought him so much more time to do all the things, and he's always busy anyway, so that's been great. He's a neat guy. He's really helped us out in the open air.
He has.
He's attended from some meetings for us, and he helped us raise $5,000 recently
did.
for the flight simulator,
Yeah.
so that was pretty exciting.
Very fun.
So
Very, very fun.
driving versus flying, that's kind of, I guess, what I had in mind. Vacation, so flying can be entertainment as well, right?
Right.
There's-
Well, it's sightseeing. You can see tons of stuff from up in the air
Yep.
and for miles. Miles and miles and miles.
I feel like I need to sing the song now. I can fly for miles. No, maybe not.
Leaving on a jet
Yep.
plane.
So, but entertainment. So there's two types of pilots well, there's many, many different types of pilots.
Right.
But the two general are low and slow and high and fast, right? So low and slow flying.
And we're opposites.
If you're in a Piper Cub and you're just putzing around, yeah, you'd love
I would.
that.
Yeah, I love that.
And you just do the perimeter of the lake, and it takes you a half hour to fly the whole dumb thing, but you can see so much and
I
watch
love
the
that.
boats and the wildlife and all the things happen. And that's kind of your thing. And I like to get into a fast airplane and go somewhere and do the thing and then get home.
Yes.
And so that's kind of my goal or mission. when I
Yeah.
get there. That's what my enjoyment. But those levels of entertainment, for me, the joy is in the journey, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the destination is also important, but then the journey getting there, you can enjoy your flying, first of all, and the sights
Right.
while you're doing there, but you're also getting there in a hurry and you're saving time, and I appreciate that.
I let you fly when we need to go fast. Because I won't get us there fast.
I have flown with some pilots that really have done some remarkable low and slow flying, and I can see the value in it. So there are times when you've just had a day and you get in the airplane, and as soon as you lift off the ground, JJ would be an example.
Oh, yeah.
I flew
yeah.
with him one time, and I was really stressful. He really wanted to fly. He's a neat guy, and he really wanted to fly. So I made time to go and take him flying because I knew it was super important to him. And I didn't really want to go, but as soon as I had a lot of stuff on my mind, it was really busy and stressful and just all these things. And as soon as we took off, I forgot about all the stuff on the ground, and we were
Right.
just flying. And it had snowed, and the scenery was just gorgeous.
Was that the
Everything
same
was
day
white.
that I went flying in
You went flying in the Cub?
in the Cub?
and we saw you.
Yeah.
And you were way below us. You were like 2,000 feet below us or something. You're like hopping fence rows and whatnot.
We
in
were.
the Cub.
We were.
And we were just
We went
watching
and
you
buzzed
tour
the one
around.
grass strip out there. What was that? West of town, northwest of town. We went and buzzed
sure.
the grass strip out there.
Yep.
Yeah, that was fun.
And watching you do that was enjoyable. I have to admit, we had a lot of fun watching you putz around your little airplane. We flew out and we did some stuff, and we did some maneuvers and a little bit of flight training. We had a lot of fun too.
And we were just doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
I'm pretty sure we left after you, and we still beat you back to the airport.
Yes, probably.
But that was a fun day. I did enjoy that. That's a fond memory for me. But travel, for vacation, the longer you're going to stay there, if you take a personal aircraft, you've got to consider tie downs or hangar,
Right.
and that sort of thing.
Right.
If you're renting an aircraft, there's a minimum number of hours per day that you have to fly or pay for to rent the airplane to keep it out overnight or for multiple days. So those are all considerations.
Right.
But overall, aviation really is a time machine, and it can do remarkable things. It can definitely change your life or have a huge impact on your life.
Absolutely.
If nothing else, just instilling confidence.
And it changes your perspective on things.
Literally.
Literally.
Gives you a higher perspective. Pilots,
We look down on people.
we like to be looked up to.
Yeah.
There's that.
There is that.
So, I guess reasons to travel. Well, reasons to get your pilot's license. Traveling is just one of them. Building confidence, gaining credentials. We've talked about that a little bit.
Yeah,
Just having
yeah.
a pilot's license gives you a credential, right? An education that is perceived. So I know at my work, so I do a lot of fiber work.
Right.
But other people have come in and done it, and they're like, "Oh, those people aren't." You don't have to be a mathematician to splice fiber. It's tedious, a lot of detailed work, and you can't be colorblind. That's for sure, because there's a lot of detail work, and the small fibers have different colors, and so you have to be able to see them and line them up and all that kind of thing. But that sort of work doesn't necessarily, like I said, require a mathematician or a high level of
Right.
what do I want to say, IQ. But having a pilot's license, people perceive you just in their natural
Right.
sort of human nature, I guess, that you are a more intelligent person. I've had several people. I sometimes lack confidence at work because I'm newer than some of the other people that are a lot younger than me, and they're way better at it. But I'm learning. I do a fine job.
Yeah.
But so many people are like, "You're a pilot, man. You are smart, and you can do all this kind of stuff, and you work hard." And,
Yeah.
you don't have
People
anything to worry
get
about.
that moment of disbelief. They're like, "You know how to fly airplanes? Are you serious?"
Well,
They have that moment where they don't believe you. They're like, "Nuh-uh."
Right. And I think you experience that more than I do. When I say I'm a pilot, they're like, "Oh, that makes sense. Like
Right.
you were in the military, whatever. We didn't know you
Right,
were a
right,
pilot,
right.
but that's cool.
That's cool.
You're a guy. You've got the cool pilot jacket, so I mean that makes
Yeah.
sense. You can fly an airplane, but I know. Well, it looks like our GoPro is too hot again.
Too hot.
Hot, yeah. Call the police and the firemen.
Makes
Wow.
a dragon want to retire, man.
I think so. But I know as a female, and that's one of the interesting things about the DEI and affirmative action going away after Trump got elected now, is my fear for females and minorities in flight training and in the aviation workforce. Because I know it's still a male-dominated trade, a white male dominated trade.
Yeah.
Something like 7% of commercial pilots are female, and 5% are all other minorities.
Yes.
So it's still a white male dominated trade. And my concern is, I know a lot of women, and you've mentioned this, but I have some friends that are females that are commercial pilots and have been flying many, many, many years. They're very successful, competent pilots. But they'll fly in and they'll walk in and people will ask them, "Where's the pilot?" And they're like,
That's me.
I'm right here." And they're like, "Ha ha ha," no, really, where's the, like, there's so much disbelief. That still happens today. Like, people still have this underlying perception that women really aren't pilots. I'm like,
Well,
we had Amelia Earhart, for crying out loud.
Right. And there's been times we've gone into fly-ins, like for breakfast, and I flew us in. Yeah, we're both pilots. But they're like, "Oh, who was your pilot?" I'm like, "Her." And they're like, "Really?
Yep.
Even though you were both in the plane?"
Right. I could have sat in the back seat. She's competent, right? So, but I don't know how to break down those perceptions,
I don't know.
right? That's one of those barriers to aviation that I hope to help eliminate
Well,
for females and minorities, is overcoming that stigma.
there is that. And I think that's a big reason why a lot of women don't want to get into aviation, because they don't want to deal with that. However, there's also a degree of just pushing past it too. So it's a two-sided thing.
I know a lot of the women that I know in aviation, and I'm not going to mention you by name, are also the types of personality that don't mind speaking up for themselves or telling people that they're sort of wrong or have
Telling them off.
misperceptions. Right.
You're not wrong. That is definitely
Like, you don't mind being an outsider and
right.
being honest and owning it with a badge
Well,
of honor.
and we talked about this in our last podcast too, the spaghetti and waffles,
Yes.
where men and women think differently. Men joke around differently than women. Women have a tendency to get really offended by the way men joke around sometimes.
That's true.
And men are crude sometimes.
Just communication between men and men and women and men and women, all three of those
They're
dynamics
different.
are different.
They're different.
And that's just that's just human nature. That's not wrong per se.
Right.
That's just human nature. But I think it's important to recognize those differences.
Right. Well, and that's the thing, is that women walk into a male-dominated trade. Men act differently with men, and they act differently with women, and women tend to get offended or think that the men are being inappropriate, and they're really not. So it's a tough thing to learn,
Sometimes
to understand.
they are. And I think that's the other important distinction. Sometimes the men are just being guys, and they may make an inappropriate comment just because they're guys and they're not really thinking about it, because they
Right.
would say that kind of thing to anybody. And women choose to be offended by that, and so then it becomes a bigger issue,
Right.
where
Well,
there are also
and-
some guys that say things to be mean or jaded
Yes.
or pointed to women,
Well,
but they try to blow it off like they're joking.
yes. And the other side of that is that when a woman walks into a room full of men, the men all feel like they got to be on their best behavior or they're going to get in trouble as well.
Yep.
So it's
They're just
very much two-sided.
One comment away from an HR action at that
Right,
point.
right. And it's just finding that middle ground and learning basically the differences of the sexes.
And some
And
women
making
like
it-
that power.
I know.
They like that power of being able to walk in a room and sort of get the men to all behave in a certain way.
Yeah, toe the line.
Right.
I don't enjoy that.
There's all kinds of facets of communication and
There are,
dynamics in
and
those
that's
relationships.
difficult.
But I think having the conversation about them, like we're doing here, and recognizing them, and then talking about them with our peers, talking about them in, interviews and in the workforce, like
Yeah.
understanding comes from sharing information.
And being willing to.
So you and I have had a lot of, what I want to say, awkward conversations,
Oh, yeah.
but it's not like we're trying to make each other feel awkward. But in order for you to understand more about me and me you,
Right.
kitty, kitty, kitty.
That caught me off guard.
I broke her, folks. That makes me happy.
Oh, my gosh.
But to learn more about each other and understand our vantage point, we have to have awkward conversations and be able to discuss things.
Sometimes, because I don't know what it's like to be a man. I don't know how you like. I understand the concept of how your brain works,
Right.
but I do not have a male brain, so
And-
I don't know.
And I have a very much lower grasp of emotional intelligence than you do. Right? And that's just differences between us, right? And that's not even a male-female thing. That's just differences in people. I know some guys that have a lot of emotional intelligence, but generally, most guys, or a lot of guys, do not.
Right.
And I know that I don't have a lot of emotional intelligence, but I've learned a lot from you because we've had discussions about it, and you've pointed things out to me that I was never aware of before, and kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But aviation is a fantastic trade. It's a fantastic education.
Yeah. It is.
It is a really neat dynamic. Once you get a pilot's license, it never goes away. To maintain it, you
Right.
have to have currency and proficiency, maintain a pilot medical certificate, and all these other facets as part of it. But the pilot certificate itself never goes away, right? So that's kind of it's an investment in yourself that never goes away.
Right.
Like you always have that part of it with you. So some of the things that we're going to talk about. So all this is kind of leading in then
Yeah.
to I said the word, but I meant to, a series that we're going to do, kind of a mini series that we're going to do
Yeah.
about some of the travel that we did, our spring break trip, and some of the things that we've done and what we got out of it, and just kind of share our experiences with you guys.
Yeah. And I think, depending on the timing, I think we may tie in the next round into it.
I think so.
Because
Probably.
That would be fitting.
It would be fitting.
and then we'll have all three forms of transportation. And it will be like
Planes,
a movie.
trains, and automobiles.
Yes.
We should entitle it Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Chitty chitty bang
Or-
bang.
Planes, trains, and automobiles. There's all kinds of directions we can go with that.
Chitty chitty choo choo.
Yep. Do you know what you call a train carrying bubble gum?
What?
A choo-choo train.
Wow. Yep.
Do you know what you get when you cross an airplane with a magician?
What?
A flying sorcerer.
Yep.
I think we're winding down, folks. So
Yeah.
we're going to call it a quits for tonight, but we'll see you in the open air.
Bye.